Today we're going to see that the first family of three world religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, the first family of these faiths is growing. And we're going to see some repetitive situations similar to what we saw with Abram and Sarai. Let's get right into it. This is going to be chapter 30. And Jono Vandor from Australia begins by reading the first three verses. Now, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." And Jacob's anger was aroused, fair enough, against Rachel. And he said, "Am I in the place of Elohim, who hath withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So she said, "Here is my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear children on my knees, that I also may have children by her." So she gave him Bilhah. So this is unusual, Jono says. We already saw this with Sarah and Hagar, and when Sarah gives Abraham her maidservant. And Nehemiah responds, "It's certainly unusual to us, but apparently that was the custom in ancient times, that if you had a maidservant and you didn't have children, you could have children. She could have children for you. This is kind of an ancient version of a surrogate pregnancy, except that it's actually her child, genealogically or genealogy through genealogy, but not physically. Or maybe Papa John would put it this way: in the genealogy, you would have an heir in the line, but genetically, obviously, it would be different. But Nehemiah concludes this thought by saying, "It says this effectually makes Bilhah his wife." So now he has another wife. Verse 4, Jono reads, "And Bilhah conceived and bore a son, and Rachel said, Elohim has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan." So she gets to call his name. So that's interesting. Maybe a little improvement with Sarai and Abram. She's excited about this being an answer to her prayer in a way at this point. Nehemiah says, so here we have another series of names. We have Dan, or Dan in English. Dan, which means he judged. She said, God judged me and also heard my voice, and judged me is Danani. So that's where you get the name Dan, Danani. In fact, I know a girl at the ranch from South America with that name. And I'd never heard it before, and here it is right here in the Bible. Verse 7, and Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bare Jacob a second son. So the maidservant again is helping out with posterity. Nehemiah says in verse 8, we have Naphtali. Naphtali, as she says, Naphtali Elohim, Naphtali. I did that so wrong. Literally, you could translate it as the wrestlings of God. I have wrestled with my sister and also prevailed. That's interesting. The phrase wrestles of God, they interpreted the word God in this context as great. So I've highlighted in verse 8 with great wrestling. So the word great in Hebrew was actually the term God. He goes, that's not wrong. That's correct. Sometimes in Hebrew, when it adds the word God to a phrase, it means like really, really, really great, because God is the greatest. So with immense wrestlings, great wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister. But literally, divine or wrestles with or of God is a literal translation. I have wrestled with sister and also prevailed. Then he was called Naphtali, which is from the root word for wrestlings. So Papa John adds a little insight. I need to add insights here about the possibility that Rachel has combined her faith with her sisters to the point that they are exercising immense faith comparable and compatible with a wrestling with God or a covenanting with God or an embrace with God, similar to the way Bruce Porter explains the patriarchal order or divine embraces, or such as the ritual embrace and the sacred embrace and the, and the mutual embrace. This may be a great example of the power of covenant relationship walking daily with God. Now, a lot of that, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. We're going to get to that soon as we talk about when Jacob becomes Israel after he wrestles with God, which is a few chapters from now. But because I've gone through this a few years ago, I remember kind of seeing the similarities here in this chapter. And then this is an ongoing project, Papa John's Scripture Note project. So it's an unfinished and always in flux as I continue to learn and add insights. Let's continue here. In fact, to just show you my personal notes, it says, I need to finish this thought. Find CVs, which are companion verses, as when Jacob wrestles with the Lord and his name is changed to Israel. And then I have the reference. So that's in Genesis chapter 32. There's also the possibility that they are exercising their faith, but not to the true and living God, but to some pagan deity or a local custom for fertility. I need to do more research. The use of the word wrestling or embracing are the focus of these footnotes. So there's a little bit an insight into how Papa John is working through this Herculean project and why I do it. I've explained before. I don't want my children and my grandchildren and my great grandchildren, extended family and and friends we've made along the way to not benefit from the efforts I've made to gain these insights. I really do want to understand the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. Unlike my friends of other Christian denominations who look at the Bible as infallible, in the restored gospel, we think that it contains great value and many truths, but that it's not as pure as it could have been or as it was in its original language, history, and context. Um, and I think that's a healthy attitude to study scripture. In today's episode, you're going to see deeper past the English words on the page than some of the other episodes. I'm really excited about some of the insights we're going to gain. So let's continue. Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her unto Jacob to wife. So Leah, who's born, I believe, 3 children at least, 3 sons, I believe, to Jacob, she's now past the age of bearing, so she's now offering Zilpah, her maid, to Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, A troop cometh. And she called his name Gad. So this seems to be a very common way of making sure your family grows. Um, Nehemiah says in verse 11, the child is called Gad because she says, by God, fortune has come, which is very interesting because what does that mean, fortune? Our culture is so pagan that for us, fortune is this mystical concept, that the God of fortune. That's that's actually mentioned in the book of Isaiah, how they worshiped a god, a deity named Gad, named Fortune. So Gad is the god of a fortune. Or later, it's taken to mean the god of fortune, I would say. Here it has the literal sense of fortune. What happens is that the pagans, they personify everything, meaning they turn it into a living, thinking thing. So they'll take rain and they'll have the god of rain. In some cultures, it's just called rain. Here we have Gad, which means fortune, like we would say in English, good luck, but they've turned luck into a god. I never would have known that without the help of Nehemiah. Verse 12, and Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. So we're moving fast through this chapter. And Leah in verse 13 says, Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. Nehemiah adds, verse 13, she names the daughter, or she says, the daughters will in me joy, which is the daughters will make me rejoice. The word Asher, it comes from the word rejoice. Verse 14, and Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them unto his mother Leah. So remember, uh, Leah is the sister that, that Laban kind of tricked Jacob into marrying, and she has the eyesight that's maybe not as good. And then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. So the firstborn Reuben has brought some flowers or some herb to his mother, and Rachel's demanding, give those to me. Verse 15, and she said unto her, it is a small matter that thou hast taken my husband, and wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with me tonight for thy son's mandrakes. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. Now, Nehemiah helps us understand that mandrakes are indeed a fertility aid. So the women understood enough about this herb and she must know about the timing of her month, and she wants her menstrual cycle not to be wasted, and she has hired her husband. You are working for me tonight. That's interesting. 17, and Elohim hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived and bare Jacob the fifth son. Interesting. Leah has another son, and this is Rachel who's basically behind this. And Leah said in verse 18, or Nehemiah says, Eshachar, Eshachar in Hebrew, which comes from the word sachar, or reward. Here is actually two names. She says, God has given me my reward because I have given my maidservant to my husband. Reward is shari. So therefore, he was called Issachar. But then as she rented or hired her husband, which is Sahar, I'm just going to say in English, I have surely rented you or hired you. So it's a double meaning there, and that's why his name is Issachar. 19, and Leah conceived again and bare Jacob the sixth son. Verse 20, and Leah said, Elohim hath endowed me with a good dowry. Now with my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. So here comes Nehemiah to help us understand. Zebulun, she says, my husband will live with me, is a proper translation of that, and or will dwell with me. Therefore, he is called dwelling, or Zebulun. 21, and afterwards she bare a daughter, okay, a daughter this time, and called her name Dinar. And then Nehemiah helps us understand the girl Danae. It doesn't say why. It's kind of obvious in Hebrew, so it doesn't say why. It's because the word judgment means Danae. It's actually the feminine of Dane, or of Dan. So Dinar and Dane are the same name, just in feminine or masculine. Again, I appreciate those insights. Verse 22, and Elohim remembered Rachel. Okay, finally. And Elohim hearkened to her and opened her womb. Nehemiah adds, whenever it says God remembers someone, it means he's interacting with them. Boy, that is so true. And I know that from experience, as I've often referred to. God's indwelling of his spirit has not left me since May of 2017. That's how powerful it is when God interacts with someone. Now at verse 23, and she conceived and bare a son and said, Elohim hath taken away my reproach. And she called, in fact, Nehemiah Gordon, he goes, that's the double meaning of Asaph, meaning God has gathered my reproach. Asaph gathered. But then he also says, Yosef, Jehovah, meaning Jehovah will add for me another son. So the name Yosef is Jehovah adds, and also gathers. Wow. Now, when I think of that in context of Joseph Smith, the founding father of the restored gospel in the latter days, as the gatherer of Israel, literally and not figuratively, and the fact that his name has that type of meaning. Yosef means to gather. Wow, interesting. And Nehemiah continues. What's interesting is the two names, Judah and Joseph. So Judah and Joseph are the first two names in history that have Jehovah, the Yud He Vav. So the three letters, the first three letters of the name of God, incorporated into them. With Joseph or Yosef, it's really the full form of his name as it appears elsewhere in the Bible as Yoheseph, Yoheseph, with the Yoho and then the Yehu, which is, why is it Yehu and Yehuda? That's because you really have Yeho Adua. I'm slaughtering that. And the Hebrew doesn't like the two O's in a row, and that's why it becomes a U. Okay, that makes sense, which is kind of a technical thing in Hebrew. But those are the first two names already in the children of Jacob. We have Jehovah's name incorporated into them. So those two names again are Judah and Joseph, have a little piece of God's divine name as part of their name. And you'll see that becomes a popular trend throughout the scriptures as parents try to put a little slice of God's divine name into their children's name. In fact, Nehemiah tells a story about his name, Nehemiah. We would say Nehemiah, but his parents spelled it out just like we would read Nehemiah with the H on the end, the IAH. But when you see Nehemiah's name here, there's no H on the end, and he didn't know that as a young man until he was like an adult, and he looked at his birth certificate, and he goes, "Why do you have an H on my birth certificate, but all my school records and my driver's license, everything has just the IA?" And it was because his father was an Ashkenazi rabbi, and out of respect for the divine name, he wanted to remove the H, so not to repetitively, because they respect the name, and there's a whole story of why the name is so sacred they don't want to pronounce it, but yet they want it in the name. But well, let's remove the H, even though it's officially on the birth certificate. It's interesting what we do, and our desires are so great for our children. Uh, Nehemiah continues, when a language doesn't like something, it makes a change within the language and within a spoken language. Like we say cannot, but it becomes can't. It's a contraction. It makes it easier to pronounce when you say can't. So both forms exist, cannot and can't. Verse 25, and it came to pass that when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away, that I may go into mine own place, into my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee. Let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee. And Jonah says, verse 17, Laban said to him, please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes. I have learned by experience that Jehovah has blessed me for your sake. Keith Johnson says, but what does it mean by experience? Jonah says, well, obviously things are going good. And by experience, in my LDS background, we came to earth to experience. So that's where my mind goes. Yeah, he's learned through life experiences. And it's obvious to us that Jehovah is blessing Jacob, right? Well, Keith Johnson says, no, not by experience. It was through divination that he learned these things. Nehemiah Gordon says, is that what he says? He says that? Jonah says, you're kidding. Where does it say that? And Nehemiah says, it says, and then there's this Hebrew word, which I can't pronounce, meaning I have divined, and Jehovah has blessed me because of you. Well, that's obvious. Laban's been living off the riches of, since Jacob's father, Isaac, was part of this family. Jonah Vandor responds, there it is, Nehemiah. What that means, divined, is he dripped oil into a cup or did something like that Based on that, he got the message that Jehovah has blessed me because of you. Jonah was like, okay. And Nehemiah says he was a pagan, pagans divine. And this is a form of divination. And Jonah was like, he was a pagan? Wow. Keith Johnson, Jonah, you got it. You caught the pearl here. This is a pearl. It's obvious to Nehemiah, but it's not obvious to the rest of us. Nehemiah says, I didn't even know that was a question in English. So here, even Nehemiah is unaware of the confusion we inherit from the English Bible because of it's lost in translation, literally. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Verse 28, and he, meaning Laban, said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. 29, and he, Jacob, said unto him, thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hast before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude. And Jehovah hath blessed thee since my coming, and now when shall I provide for mine own house also? Verse 31, and he, Jacob, said, what shall I give thee? And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything if thou wilt do this thing for me. I will again feed and keep thy flock. And Jacob, I will pass through all thy flocks today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So they're coming to terms, they're haggling, they're bartering, and they're bartering on a future coloring of the size of the flock and how it will be separated. Verse 33, so shall my righteous answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen from me. And Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. So it's confusing to us, but they've come to an agreement. Verse 35, and he, Laban, removed that day the he goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hands of his sons. And he, Laban, set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters in the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. Verse 39, and the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. Now, Papa John did a Google search. The word ring-straked refers to livestock, specifically sheep and goats, that have distinctive streaks, stripes, or bands of color encircling their bodies, legs, or feet. These markings differ from the solid colored animals. Okay, that's helpful. I love searching the scriptures, and I've seen how Googling verses in scripture is only becoming more and more easy and quicker. And with AI, there's so much information. Again, you go back to Christianity and the first English Bible and how hard they worked to preserve it for us. And yet today we just have so much information in this information age right at our fingertips. Verse 40, and Jacob did separate the lambs and set the faces of the flocks towards the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not into Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. So because of this word cattle, Papa John's like, obviously we're talking about sheep and goats here. Why does this word cattle keep appearing in these verses? So another Google search, and it says some Bible translations say cattle, like we have here in the KJV, verses 40 and 41. This refers to livestock slash flocks in general, yet in the context of verses 32 to 40, clearly it identifies the animals as speckled slash spotted sheep and goats. So cattle in the sense of livestock. Again, very helpful information for clarity to understand the Bible and it's as far as it is translated correctly. It's happening, guys. We're doing it. Verse 42, but when the cattle were feeble, he put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, meaning Jacob, he being the man, and had much cattle, and maid servants, and men servants, and camels, and asses. And we're going to end this episode with Nehemiah saying this. This, I have to say, is one of the most bizarre passages in the Bible. The reason it's bizarre is it really sounds like he's performing some kind of magic. It leaves me wondering, what on earth? Why is he doing this? What is the function of these sticks? It sounds like he believed that putting these sticks next to the sheep while they were copulating is going to produce certain results in how the offspring markings come out, in a sense. So that makes me feel better that even our Hebrew scholar doesn't understand everything, but my understanding is definitely increasing as we go through the Papa John scripture notes in this method. Hope you enjoyed that again as much as I did. And we'll talk to you again in the next episode. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.